entitled Executing AUKUS Pillar 2 ITAR Exemptions for the UK and Australia. The second session will be a closed session with the ambassadors representing our AUKUS partners, the United Kingdom and Australia. The focus of this discussion is to assess the administration's efforts in implementing AUKUS Pillar 2 3 years after having first announced this trilateral security pact in September 2021, and how the U.S. industry views that progress and the opportunities to come. I would like to offer myself 5 minutes to give an opening statement. On April 19, 2 days from now, the President has the chance to deter war in the Indo-Pacific and challenge the generational threat posed by CCP. Burdensome U.S. regulations governing arms exports to two of our closest allies, Australia and the United Kingdom, block our allies' ability to effectively cooperate with and contribute to the U.S. efforts to deter China. We need regulatory relief that will unleash a new era of cooperation to bolster American tech and innovation so we can make weapons faster and grow our defense industrial base. This committee sat with industry, the British, and the Australians last year. We listened, and this committee enacted AUKUS. We're working every day to ensure that AUKUS is implemented the right way. I want to thank the members for continuing the conversations today. This is all possible due to legislation that I passed along with my colleagues, Chairman Ranking Member Mix, Representative Bill Huizinga, and Tom Kien, which resulted in AUKUS legislation passed in last year's National Defense Authorization Act. The AUKUS Trilateral Security Pact was announced more than 3 years ago, but has yet to meet its full potential because the administration is moving too slow on implementation. Today, innovative companies and defense primes in the US, Australia, and UK remain subject to the same burdensome bureaucracy and regulations as they had prior to the AUKUS announcement. Red tape, bureaucracy, and regulation is the death of innovation. The UK and Australia have fought with us in every major war in the 100 years before. We already share the most sensitive of intelligence and sell the most advanced of weapons, including nuclear propulsion, the crown jewel of US naval technology. Given the strong bipartisan support in Congress for AUKUS to succeed, there was no clear reason that we continue to burden our closest allies with Washington's red tape. So we wrote a law to give the President the ability to cut this tape on April 19. The President should grant this exemption in the coming days. However, we are hearing that may not happen, which is shameful. We need to grant this exemption and make sure it's workable for the industry. So I hope this administration is engaging with industry to make AUKUS a success. The worst thing that could happen here would be to create an unworkable regime that only makes things harder. The administration must act now. There is no time to waste. Do we have ranking member here with us? Okay. Okay. All right. If the ranking member Mix shows up, I will offer him the courtesy and ask him to give his opening remarks. Now I'm pleased to welcome our 4 distinguished guests: Aerospace Industries and Associates, Dak Hardwick, Vice President of International Affairs, and Anduril Senior Vice President of Global Defense, Greg Kausner, and welcome back, Mr. Kausner. General Atomics Aeronautical Systems Vice President for Government Affairs and Strategic Communications, Nikki Johnson, welcome. And Lockheed Martin Vice President for International Trade and Supply Chain, Mr. Mark Weber, welcome. I want to welcome all of you to this conversation. Your full statement will be made available on the committee website, And I'll ask you to keep your spoken remarks to 3 minutes. I'm sorry, normally we give 5 minutes, 3 minutes in order to allow time for discussion. And I now recognize Dak Hardwick for your opening statement.
Chairwoman Kim, thank you, members of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here today. Let me introduce myself. I'm Dak Hardwick from the U.S. Aerospace Industries Association. AIA represents over 320 aerospace and defense companies, ranging from family-run businesses to multinational corporations that design, build, supply, and provide cutting-edge military, commercial, and dual-use technology for the U.S. and the international warfighter. The AUKUS partnership is a recognition that U.S. industry is a vital part of addressing the complex and evolving challenges in the Indo-Pacific. AUKUS Pillar 2 represents a critical opportunity to deeply integrate the UK, US, and Australia industrial bases. In the FY24 NDAA, this committee showed real leadership in ushering in a landmark shift in US defense trade policy. Without you, where we are in AUKUS would not have happened. The authorization for the exemption from the International Traffic in Arms Regulation represents a sea change for US industry. It also represents a sea change for the export control systems in the US, the UK, and Australia. To meet the congressional intent of the language, industry is focused on the implementation of your ITAR regulation, or of your ITAR exemption. If implemented correctly, it will unlock the full potential of AUKUS. For AUKUS implementation, our industry is informed by the process used to negotiate the Defense Trade Cooperation Treaties with Australia and the UK, which the Senate ratified in 2010. These treaties, while they were well-intended, were implemented largely without feedback from industry, who had little ability to comment on the effectiveness or efficacy of the implementing regulations before they were published. The Defense Trade Cooperation Treaties serve as a lesson for industry and government alike, that regular, consistent industry feedback is essential to the success of AUKUS. To avoid the pitfalls of AUKUS, it is critical to understand the regulatory complexities the industry counters on a daily basis, and the example here that I will use is the sale of the Virginia-class submarines to Australia. The sale of the Virginia-class submarine was actually never intended to be sold to anybody other than the United States Navy. It is a U.S.-only program that contains the most guarded technology available to the U.S. warfighter. Under the existing ITAR regulations, nearly every single of the non-nuclear components of the Virginia-class submarine will need an export license. Without an appropriately implemented ITAR exemption, the Virginia-class submarine program has the potential to generate not hundreds, but thousands of new licenses that would be required for U.S. manufacturers, which then have to be adjudicated by the licensing officials at the Department of State. Given the budgetary and personnel limitations of the licensing system, this is unsustainable, and it runs counter to the license-free environment between the partners that AUKUS envisions. In addition, the excluded technologies list that will be part of the implementing regulation will be a key factor in executing the AUKUS exemption. An excluded technologies list will determine which technologies require a license regardless of the exemption. An expansive excluded technologies list runs counter to the intent of the AUKUS exemption and could severely limit the benefits of the ITAR exemption as envisioned by Congress. In closing, the AUKUS partnership is a landmark agreement that will increase cooperation between the industrial bases of all three nations. But the partnership cannot happen with the technology innovation and the production capacity of the industry in all three nations. The AUKUS moment is before us, and our industry is poised to cooperate, innovate, and deliver the capabilities that you as the Congress have demanded by AUKUS. Thank you for your time. I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Hardwick. Let me now recognize Mr. Gregory Kausner.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Meeks, distinguished members. I appreciate the invitation to be back and to speak with you today. I first want to thank Congress, and in particular this committee, for your vision to advance the AUKUS security partnership in a tangible way. I'd also like to note our appreciation for the State Department's efforts to drive implementation, as well as similar efforts from our AUKUS partners. This landmark agreement is the culmination of more than a decade of work by the U.S. government and our allies, and it has the potential to be a monumentous achievement for cooperative defense. AUKUS represents an opportunity to fortify the arsenal of democracy as it comes under threat from the forces of autocracy. This historic partnership not only benefits Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States, but it could deliver a critical deterrent at a time of unprecedented strain on the rules-based international order. Since last year's HVAC Roundtable, Congress collaborated with industry and our partners to pass what is perhaps the most substantive reform to the international traffic in arms regulations since its inception. It aligns the respective export control regimes of the AUKUS nations and establishes the groundwork for the integration of our defense industrial bases to sharpen our shared technological edge. We have been encouraged by the focus on implementation. Australia recently passed landmark reciprocal legislation, and the UK is reforming its licensing program to provide exemptions for Australia and the United States. But make no mistake, regulatory reform in and of itself is not a deterrent. To outpace the threat, AUKUS Pillar 2 offers the opportunity to collaborate on the development of advanced defense capabilities such as hypersonics, electronic warfare, artificial intelligence, quantum technologies, and undersea systems. As Australia's submarines come online under Pillar 1 in the decade ahead, Pillar 2 has the potential to set the stage here and now with enhanced maritime awareness, networked autonomous systems, improved decision-making, and advanced strike capabilities. With the wind of ITAR reform at our back, there are a number of ways in which AUKUS Pillar 2 could accelerate the delivery of advanced capability. While government-driven co-development is top of mind, we should not lose sight of the benefits we could derive from organic industry-to-industry collaboration. This will be challenging. Shared development across diverse companies separated by international borders still presents obstacles. Delivering on the bold vision of AUKUS will require industry partners to adopt core principles like open architecture, software-first design, 21st century manufacturing, and scalable supply chains. As we strive for greater interoperability between our platforms, we should also ensure that our approach to technology development, building factories, and even working together is equally interoperable, which means designing with modularity in mind. At Anduril Industries, we think about modularity from the moment we conceive of a new product. Modularity enables economies of scale when applied across a family of systems and allows for seamless integration of commercial off-the-shelf parts. Whether it's an autonomous undersea vehicle, a collaborative combat aircraft, or a suite of sensor-fused modalities, a modular system enables the utilization of complementary components for a variety of missions. It also helps us withstand supply chain disruptions. When system components are interchangeable, easily replaced with alternatives across international borders, we take a significant step towards realizing allied supply chain resiliency. Ideally, a cooperative development program propelled by AUKUS Pillar 2 would be based on a modular design and an open architecture. Such a program would foster cooperation on capability development in the near term and pave the way for future projects in the long term. Take undersea autonomy, for example, or reform. Participant nations could use a flexible, digitally engineered hull as a common platform to develop a range of mission payloads for future fleets of autonomous underwater vehicles. Each nation would be able to focus on mission sets and adjacent capabilities most relevant to its concept of operation and deliver capabilities to warfighter on a time horizon that actually matters. Concurrently, the development of nationally produced payloads would allow each nation to locally employ engineers, manufacturers, welders, each benefiting from the knowledge gained through experimentation with other parties. The inherent advantage to this approach is that alliance starts to solve for the challenge of contested logistics. The effort of an adversary to deliberately disrupt our operations and facilities would be mitigated by geographically dispersing trusted allied personnel and production capacity. Thus, the modular payload configuration of an autonomous undersea vehicle makes it an attractive candidate for joint development, even as each nation eventually deploys various customized versions of its own platform. This is but one example. AUKUS nations could work together to develop shared capability in other domains and across a range of programs. In each case for cooperation, we would see common advantages. For instance, software-defined command and control would allow our countries the digital means of integrating disparate sensors and systems so as to truly enable 21st century interoperability. The deep bench of engineering talent across AUKUS nations would work together to identify emerging technologies, shared lessons, and iteratively develop new capabilities at greater speed and scale. The incorporation of locally produced sensors, payloads, and other components means that partner nations need not insist on a one-size-fits-all solution and would leverage their comparative advantage. And finally, by broadening the base of suppliers, expanding markets, and eliminating time-consuming administrative burdens, AUKUS members would reap the benefits of efficiency and increased production opportunities. So to summarize, we are grateful for the leadership of Congress and this committee has shown on these difficult issues. We see tremendous potential for successful outcomes through streamlined cooperation. Our workforce, alongside many others in industry, are eager to work with you to make the AUKUS partnership a success and deliver capabilities at pace and scale to preserve the competitive advantage that free countries have enjoyed for generations. Thank you again, and look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Kausner. Let me now recognize Ms. Nikki Johnson.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Chairwoman Kim, distinguished members and guests, good morning, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Nikki Johnson, Vice President of Government Affairs for General Atomics Aeronautical Systems. You might most likely know us for making the Predator or Reaper aircraft, but today we're working on a number of exciting next-gen programs like our Advanced Gambit UAS. So long before AUKUS, GA sought to enhance our cooperation among AUKUS and AUKUS-related countries with our own significant investments. The UK's Royal Air Force was our launch customer for the MQ-9 Bravo or Sky Guardian aircraft, which is now our primary export platform for some of America's closest partners. More recently, we demonstrated our Mojave aircraft taking off and landing from a British aircraft carrier. Largely funded by our own research dollars, this is forming the foundation for potential cooperation with the UK Royal Navy, other NATO allies, Japan, and Korea. Our unique history and experience in UAS is why I was asked to speak to you today about the Missile Technology Control Regime, or the MTCR, and AUKUS. Whether for deterrence or use in a conflict with China, the U.S. and its allies will rely heavily on sophisticated UAS in the vast Indo-Pacific. In fact, Secretary of the Air Force Kendall has said he's going to buy 1,000 collaborative combat aircraft UAS. Other AUKUS members are also making investments in advanced UAS, and one aspiring AUKUS member, Canada, is modernizing its fleet with MQ-9Bs, while another, Japan, plans to replace some manned units with UAS. Clearly, there's a recognition that the ability to field adequate numbers of UAS will be important to deter China and essential should deterrence fail. But there are three critical elements in this pursuit. First, we have to continue to advance UAS and autonomous technologies. Second, we must have the ability to produce UAS quickly and in mass quantities for the US and its partners. And third, we need dispersed and redundant supply chains for resiliency. Realizing this requires an urgent and comprehensive approach to modernizing US export regimes and policies. We absolutely applaud the efforts of this committee and current and past administrations to address the challenges presented by the MTCR to UAS exports and cooperation. But there's always more work to do. The U.S. must continue to press for updates to the MTCR while also using its own tools to enhance cooperation on UAS. The original intent of the MTCR to control the proliferation of missiles for delivering WMD is still very relevant today, but the MTCR did not anticipate modern UAS, which are widespread, and many are conducting the same missions as manned aircraft. Updating the MTCR to focus on WMD threats, not UAS, isn't just good for improving US and partner capabilities, it also would breathe new life into an essential regime seen by many as a remnant of a bygone era. The MTCR-driven imbalance causes the loss of revenue for US companies, reduces available IRAD, prevents international cooperation, and weakens a critical part of the industrial base. Strategic partners are pivoting to foreign competitors. China, not a member of the MTCR, is using its sales to turn into an engine for revenue, advancing their capabilities to the detriment of America's security. The MTCR presents other challenges. For example, after the meeting between President Biden and Japanese Prime Minister Kishida, the two nations said they are exploring cooperation on advanced UAS like CCAs. But we will not be able to do this type of cooperation at the speed necessary without reform. AUKUS can be a game changer, but closing the gap between aspiration and implementation requires partnership between the US government and industry. We are encouraged by the whole-of-government approach to these issues, and we hope to work with all stakeholders to create the conditions necessary for AUKUS to succeed. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Finally, I recognize Mr. Mark Weber for your opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim, Ranking Member Meeks, members of the committee. It is my great pleasure to be here with such a distinguished group of industry panelists to discuss AUKUS Trilateral Security Pact and highlight the importance of modernizing and streamlining export controls to support defense cooperation among the AUKUS nations. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this critical issue. It is my honor to be here on behalf of the over 120,000 employees of Lockheed Martin. Lockheed Martin has over 100 years of experience supporting U.S. national security solutions and fulfilling the defense requirements of our allies and international security cooperation partners. Our work with both the United Kingdom and Australia spans much of this history. In Australia, our commercial partnership extends over 70 years with programs or suppliers in every state and territory. Similarly, in the UK, Lockheed Martin has over 80 years of cooperative experience. Our innovations and partnerships have long contributed to the UK's defense, security, and prosperity. And while the F-35 is currently providing game-changing fifth-generation capability to the UK Armed Forces, our legacy was forged decades ago as the RAF pilots took to the skies in Lockheed Hudson and Martin Marauder aircraft. This robust history of cooperation has been made possible by the long-standing defense partnership between our nations. But it is time to improve the way we authorize defense cooperation with our closest security partners. Members of this committee have recognized that the United States and our allies should take additional steps to protect sensitive technologies from potential adversaries and malfeasant actors by strengthening our export controls and sanctions regimes. It is equally as important that we make it easier to cooperate with our international partners on defense next-gen technologies. Our greatest strength is staying ahead of technological advancement by working with our friends while also denying countries of concern access to items that they need to do us harm. In December, Chairman McCall noted that the inclusion of AUKUS-related provisions in the NDAA, quote, will save time and resources across the government and industry and give the U.S. better tools to deter China. I wholeheartedly agree. Indeed, the export control changes envisioned in Pillar 2 of AUKUS are instrumental to the success of this entire initiative. It is imperative that we get this right. We expect the United States to publish draft regulations and begin the process for implementing the AUKUS exemption and expedited licensing procedures. With that in mind, I'd like to make a few initial observations. First, the new exemption process should be simple, broad in scope, and broad in applicability. By that, I mean the exemption process cannot be more complex than getting a license. Second, new expedited licensing procedures should not seek to just go faster. Rather, for the narrow set of sensitive technologies that are not eligible for the new exemption, it is critical that the U.S. government seek to limit the necessity for multiple authorizations that follow. While the new exemption focuses on the head of the licensing beast, it is the tail of the process that can be most cumbersome with the need for multiple amendments and renewals. One yes should be sufficient to permit a flow of cooperation. Third, U.S. technology release and export policies that govern the review of export license applications are just as important as the licensing requirements themselves in streamlining authorization. Proactive and forward-leaning policies that authorize the cooperation with a clear presumption of approval are needed. Finally, we must ensure that the new procedures are compatible with the existing licensing frameworks. It is critical that we not create multiple licensing systems that complicate industry compliance. This is true of the UK and Australian systems as well. In closing, I'd like to suggest that we consider the important work that the U.S. government and Congress are now doing to improve defense cooperation with the UK and Australia as a start to this process, not the end. The licensing exemption and expedited licensing procedures should be updated as time goes by to ensure that support the need for seamless integration among the allies and are responsive to modern business practices. And we should continue to look for other ways to improve international defense cooperation and the foreign military sales process, such as expanding financing options that can match foreign competition and make U.S. products more attractive. Chairwoman, I commend you and all the members of this committee who have shaped this historic initiative. Thank you again for the opportunity to participate in today's roundtable discussion. I very much look forward to our exchange of ideas and answering any questions you have.
Thank you, Mark. And I thank all of you for your opening remarks. And just want to remind everybody that because this is an informal roundtable, we will ask members to raise their hand if interested in speaking and asking questions. And I believe our staff has already taken note of your interest, and we have the list going. And he's going to advise me in the order, and members will speak in that order which we have identified your interest in. So let me now use my time to ask questions. First of all, it will be to all of you. What will it mean for your businesses once the national ITAR exemptions are issued for UK and Australia? And do you have examples of how this will benefit your ability to deliver innovative solutions to our warfighter, address defense industrial-based challenges, and save on operational costs? Any one of you can go first.
Sure, I'm happy to address that, Chairwoman Kim. Well, first, just a little background on Anduril Industries. We're a defense technology company. Our focus is getting cutting-edge technology capabilities into the hands of the U.S. and its allied forces. As this committee knows well, the current security environment is defined by near-peer competition. And we have a firm belief in Anduril that the next great power war will be deterred through not just conventional arms, but through harnessing affordable distributed mass. And the way to harness affordable distributed mass is through unmanned systems. Not just unmanned systems that are remotely piloted, but ones that are autonomous and acting in autonomous ways that are programmed by humans. We also have to have the manufacturing capacity to back that up. And so what was once known as the arsenal of democracy in the U.S., in order for us to recapture that pivotal position in the global market, it's going to require us to think differently about weapons acquisition and the order of battle that we employ in U.S. forces. But we can magnify that order of battle by harnessing the industrial capacity of our allies as well.
Thank you.
In a resilient way.
Thank you. I would like to ask others to chime in a little.
Well, thank you for your question. So first, as I mentioned in my remarks, the legislation and even the efforts that the State Department and others have taken to ease the policies regarding the export and cooperation on UAS have been a great first step. But like I said, there's still more work to do. Generally, MTCR-controlled technologies are actually carved out from some of the ITAR exemptions and exceptions that have been addressed in some of the AUKUS policies. And therefore, our understanding is we won't be able to leverage those. So we should change that. And that's why we look forward to continuing our conversations with state, you, and other agencies to talk about how we can achieve the intent of AUKUS.
Thank you. Mark.
Thank you, Chairwoman Kim. I want to make 3 points in response to that. The first is I think it's incredibly important to realize the strong message that this sends to our strategic partners who are looking to the United States not just because we provide the best products, but also because we are reliable, transparent, and ultimately easy to work with. And I think making the system easier for those partners sends a very clear message that we're committed to those relationships. The second point I'd make is it's also a very important message for our potential adversaries, that we are willing to break down the barriers for working with our strategic partners and build those relationships. Again, a very strong message. In terms of examples, the third point that I would make is Lockheed Martin does many sophisticated, large programs with both the United Kingdom and Australia. For instance, our Air 6500 program in Australia is a joint battle management system, and that requires, in many cases, dozens, if not hundreds of licenses to support. Most of that technology, if not all of that technology, should be eligible for an exemption so that we can do that seamless collaboration with our partners without having to go back for multiple authorizations in the future. So hopefully that will be the outcome when the regulations are published later this year.
Thank you. Dak.
Chairwoman Kim, let me thank all of the panelists here for their answers, and let me just come back to something that I mentioned as part of the opening. So in addition to large companies that AIA represents, half of our membership are small and medium-sized companies. And so when we think about export control regulations, we talk a lot about the regulatory burden associated with the export control regulations. That regulatory burden falls disproportionately on small and medium-sized companies. So with an ITAR exemption, what you see is the opportunity for small and medium-sized companies to have the regulatory burden reduced, but at the same time, encourage them to come into the supply chain to allow for more resiliency within the supply chain. And that's not just in the United States. That's also in the UK and Australia. So if we can have an ITAR exemption that reduces regulatory burden, that invites companies into the supply chain, the integrated supply chain, you're going to have supply chain resiliency across the 3 AUKUS nations, and that's really the intent of Congress is to have that resiliency and build a scaled combined industrial base.
Thank you. One more question. Nikki, as you mentioned, Canada, has its own national exemption, and last week we learned that Japan is interested in partnering with AUKUS. So should this administration consider a national exemption for Japan and the other Five Eyes partners, even beyond AUKUS?
Chairwoman, thank you for your question. I think it's a great question, and I think the answer is absolutely yes. To deter and defeat China, cooperation with all of our partners in the region and globally is critical, and we need to, together, set the conditions for making this type of cooperation a success.
Okay. All right. Let me now recognize Congressman Mills for your lines of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you to our distinguished guests for coming here today. I wanted to kind of just point out some of the obvious statements here. The Director of Defense Trade Controls of the U.S. State Department has continued to be one of the biggest issues with holding up approvals that are necessary not only for programs of record, but also for new programs for us to be able to start up for our partners. And looking at the geopolitical relationships and the alliances of Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea, it's now more important than ever for us to look at our bilateral, trilateral, and even the Quad as agreements that we can try and work at in a more nimble but also an expedited fashion. If any of you had any suggestions on programmatic and procurement reform, what would that look like?
Congressman, if I may, just immediately, the question is about the programmatic reform. I'll refer you to something that I put in the statement to assist the Directorate of Defense Trade Controls with that assistance. Many of the companies that we represent, as well as the companies that are at this table, this is an administrative answer. They are responsible for applying for export licenses and the processing of those export licenses using an antiquated IT system that is an interagency IT system. So that IT system has not been upgraded in 20 years. And I can tell you from the experience of these
Although according to them, by the way, I'm sorry to interrupt, the DDTC response hotline is the new reform, right? As of a couple of years ago, you can now check on your program that's being stalled within its actual programs, but that was their way of saying that we're improving our system by adding a hotline to it. So we know how antiquated and how out of date it truly is.
I would encourage the committee to look at the last couple of years. And there has been some outages in the licensing system of requiring the hand carrying of licenses between the departments. And certainly as we are trying to operate at speed and at scale, that's an unsustainable situation, especially if if we have a number of licenses going through where the ITAR exemption is not appropriately scoped.
Well, I can tell you that one of the things that I truly want to look at is the exemptions, especially when it comes to Australia and the UK, where we're going to be needing those more than ever should there be an attempt for a China unification or have we an Indo-PACOM fight that we're going to have to respond to in a rapid fashion. Knowing that DDTC and the director there, the person who's responsible for Civ Milpol, is a political appointment, do you think that would be better served as a career position as opposed to a political appointment?
I don't know whether or not the political aspect of it or the career aspect of it would make a major difference in the way the oversight is done of that particular process. I think it's important to note that the men and women that do the licensing both within the State Department and the other agencies, DOD and elsewhere, they have a tough job. And there's a lot of licenses that are coming into the system, even with a reduction in total number of licenses that are coming in now. I think there's more that can be done to expedite that review. I would suggest that we need to be thinking about doing less with less, not more with less, to the extent that a lot of those licenses, particularly those that are going to our strategic allies and partners, we really need to be considering mechanisms like the AUKUS exemption to help break down sort of the routine that no longer needs to be done in that process.
I completely agree. And I'll say that the DSP-5, the DSP-83, for those that are utilizing certain types of energetics, you know, for example, in my previous company, we use a lot of A5s, M2, CH6, things like this, where it required additional support. Then you had to go through the ATF in addition to the State Department, in addition to the DOD, in addition to if it was over 50 million come to Congress. Then, so it was a very cumbersome program. And when you're talking about the speed and evolution of warfare, especially as we're seeing today, that process cannot match and meet the requirements for us to be able to try and not only support a sustained fight for ourselves if need be, but also for our allies. And so I agree that the process needs to be streamlined in a more concise way. And I think that some of it in all entirety could have gone to the Commerce as opposed to staying within the State Department, which would have also simplified things. And I see you shaking your head yes, so I assume that we're all kind of on the same lines of this. For kind of my final statement on this, Australia has played such a major role, and I don't think that people understand when it comes to energetics, that companies like Dales and what they've been able to do for us. There's only one company in the entire United States, which is BAE Holston, who even makes A5, knowing that's a key component of our mortar systems, our 40 millimeter, as well as for our 155 artillery shells. Do you feel that a exemption that would essentially stop the kind of cumbersome process would also enable the U.S. to increase its capabilities to build 155 at a higher production rate?
So, Congressman, on energetics in specific, I would count a story I heard that I had from a U.S. DoD official, and it went like this. It was interesting to see when we provided the industry the funding that they needed to develop energetics, how quickly the industry was activated to meet that need. The demand signal that we talk about a lot in industry, the demand signal that is needed is funding and contracting in order to meet that need. There's no other better way to activate the industrial base than providing the funding and then activating many of the OEMs that then flow down to the supply chain to activate those companies as well. Having some additional licensing throughput certainly is necessary, but ultimately, if we want to develop energetics in this country, we need funding into the industrial base to develop that industrial base.
Well, I really appreciate all the answers we had today, and I understand the struggles, especially as we had gone to the LCTA, kind of low-cost, technically acceptable bids that didn't reflect the comp ranges for the 20%, nor the 52.102 FAR regulations of free and open competition. So there's many competing regulations that we have to deal with in combat as well. But it is the private sector that should be driving these policies. It is not the government and our capacity who should be driving the private sector. And I fully embrace the idea that we need to work in a more unified way to coalesce around what is the best plan and strategy for us in the future. So thank you for the tireless efforts. Thank you for being the actual job creators, not the federal government. And thanks for going through these long processes where before BAFO, it may take you 2, 3, and 4 years where you're having to take massive expenditures up front, where you're having to maintain key staff up front that may not be on a program, and taking the financial burden on behalf of the slow and cumbersome process of government. With that, I yield back.
Thank you. Let me now recognize Congressman Baird.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the witnesses, all of you, for being here. I always gain something from these comments from those of you that are experts in the field. But I guess my question deals for any one of you. I would like to know what the biggest limitation is when it comes to sharing our technology with the AUKUS partners, and if we can do that any way you want to do it, or all of you.
Sir, I'll take the first shot at that. I think the biggest limitation is largely what the ITAR reform is going after, which is the, at this point, unnecessary regulatory burden to facilitate the exchange of ideas, concepts, technical information, data between our closest allies. And it's important to just recognize that the Arms Export Control Act and the ITAR, which it governs, was created at a time when the U.S. had an unrivaled advantage against all others in terms of technology development. We are no longer in that position. And our ability to collaborate closely with our closest allies is our decisive advantage against near peers. And so we want to streamline that to the maximum extent practicable, which is why I think Mark did a really nice job of covering this in his remarks. What we don't want to incur in this new implementation of the regulatory reform is a process as complicated as we've just navigated. So we want to make sure that the excluded technology list remains as streamlined as possible so that collaboration between scientists, engineers, manufacturers can flow smoothly across borders within companies and across companies.
If I could just add, Congressman, and thank you for your question, time and cost of going through these lengthy and sometimes unpredictable timelines related to getting approvals is a huge challenge and really impedes our ability to take our investments, of which GA does quite a significant amount of IRAD investment, to take those investments and innovate our capabilities. So, from my perspective, the ITAR reform that Greg and Mark referenced are very, very important, is a very, very important part of the kind of reforming the overall process. But we also, again, have to look at some of the export control regimes that the United States is a party to. The MTCR is not unique in the sense that emergent technologies always outpace the regimes. So again, not just, we need to continue to talk to the MTCR about updating its own rules to reflect the realities of today, and absent that, continue to identify tools that are in the U.S. government's toolbox to address those challenges. Thank you.
I have one additional question. In sharing technology, I've been on the battlefield, and it's important that we protect the proprietary. So what measures are taken to make sure that in sharing this information, we don't give away some of the proprietary things that I think are important to our own warfighters?
Yep, sir, I think that's a critical point. Well, part of the implementation of the ITAR reform was ensuring that the UK and Australia had reciprocal protections around technology. And that's in large part what the Secretary of State will be certifying going forward. I also think it's important to acknowledge our greatest tool in this regard in terms of protecting technology, it's speed. If we can stay ahead of our adversaries in developing new technology, we will inherently be protecting the crown jewels of the U.S. We arguably spend more time trying to protect the technology that we have versus focusing on protecting the technology that we are developing 5 years from now. That intellectual property is what's going to decide whether or not we enter into a great power competition or not.
I agree with you with staying ahead of our adversaries, okay? Thanks.
Thank you. I now recognize Representative Mast for your questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. The fact of the matter is we're never going to outnumber our enemies. We're not going to outnumber a standing Chinese force or a standing North Korean force or combined with a Russian force or an Iranian force. Just the numbers aren't going to work out exactly that way, and it's important that we continue to have these capabilities. I appreciate very much the work that you all are doing in this sector, and I want to ask two questions. One, on this side of the House, I look at FMS specifically and say there's not a lot that you can say specifically about it. To me, it's even on this side of the table, it's like this meat grinder that something goes in, you don't really have a lot of idea of what goes on in the middle of it, and you basically have no idea when it's coming out the other end, and that's not the way the grinder is supposed to work. And so to that vein, is there any guidance that you can point to that the administration is giving you all right now on how to reach what will be the AUKUS intent? Is there any kind of roadmap being laid out to you all right now, in advance, that you're able to look for the right targets, look for things? And then another question on the other side of the water that I would ask is this: are there some specific areas with UK, with Australia, that you all look at them and say they really excel at that, and we're looking forward to them, being the partner in this, being in this way, because they're gonna really help move the game forward?
So, Congressman, you've asked a couple important questions there, and thank you for raising all of those issues. Starting with the last one first, I think it's important to recognize that export controls are a necessary function to protect our national security technologies. I don't think anyone here at the table would argue that we shouldn't control these technologies. The question is, how do we control them best? And if we can break down the barriers in the system and the speed from flash to bang, so to speak, be it an FMS sale or otherwise a direct commercial sale, it promotes greater cooperation, for sure. So there is a deterrent effect for partners to collaborate and cooperate if the process is too cumbersome and onerous. So I think that's one of the hopefully intended outcomes that we'll see from the regulations. To answer your first question, the guidance that we're getting is the administration plans to publish draft regulations in May, and we're grateful for the fact that they've indicated that they would like public comment as that regulatory process moves forward. So we're certainly looking forward to May and into the summer to help the government shape those regulatory processes to make sure that they work for industry.
Congressman, if I might, let me take your FMS question first. It's important for us to understand that there is a system or continuum between foreign military sales and direct commercial sales. So in the U.S. defense trade system, there's actually, it's about 2/3 of direct commercial sales versus 1/3 about foreign military sales. The challenge that we have in the industry is identifying those items that are on the FMS list and whether they need to be FMS or whether they need to be DCS. And it's a constant conversation that we have with the government about, why is this being sold FMS only? Why can't you sell it DCS? So comprehensively looking at the equipment that's being, or the technology that's being sent via FMS and asking deliberatively, does this have to go FMS or can it go DCS? Because DCS does go faster. There's no question about that. On the technology related to the UK and Australia, absolutely outstanding R&D happening in both countries. Radars, quantum, both countries are very much focused on those. We know that they are deeply collaborative with the U.S. on a lot of those technologies. The challenge is some of those technologies, frankly, cannot be shared without an export license right now. And under an AUKUS ITAR exemption, we will be able to freely share that information between personnel that would be collaborating in our federally funded research and development cooperations within our universities. That's what's critical. It's not just the parts, it's not just the data, it's also the people that we have to share the information with.
Sir, if I may, I would take the FMS question in a slightly different direction. I think what AUKUS offers us is an opportunity to realize a higher level of international security cooperation, which is often referred to as international armaments cooperation. So foreign military sales has historically been viewed as more of a transaction. It's not a fair characterization. There's lots of cooperative development and production that goes on within foreign military sales. But international armaments cooperation is governed under a parallel set of authorities, which allows two nations or a group of nations to collaborate closely in terms of joint development initiatives, objectives, joint funding mechanisms. These are things that are streamlined through the licensing regulatory reform that's ongoing. But there's a whole realm of cooperation that exists government to government where we could do more to accelerate that warfighter to warfighter collaboration with U.S. industry and Australian industry and UK industry working hand in glove. That's an interesting place to explore, and I know that there's a lot of thought ongoing about that in the Department of Defense and State Department.
Sir, if I could just add, so as Mark said, we're absolutely looking forward to the opportunity to comment on some of the things that the administration will be publishing later this spring. But with regard to your FMS question, one thing that comes to mind is non-programs of record. I highlighted in my remarks, and I think, sir, you alluded to non-programs of record earlier, that they are a significant challenge. DoD has recognized this problem absolutely and has taken steps to try to facilitate kind of more predictable timelines and costs for non-programs of record, but truly it is an area that needs more attention. Increasingly, our allies and partners are choosing non-programs of record to fulfill their capabilities, and the unpredictability and the timelines associated with it are unsustainable if we really want to get to a point where we are cooperating to the fullest extent with our AUKUS partners. So I'd recommend that that is another area we look at when it comes to FMS. Thank you.
Okay, I served in the FMS office in Cairo, Egypt, when we were discussing both the M1 tanks and the F-16s and others. I was in the Special Technical Operations Center in the Pentagon. Now, it dealt with certainly more classified programs, but it was the issue of how do we bring black programs into the real world. I want to follow up on the FMS question, because I'm sure all of you have been in to look at the DCSA wall. I want specific recommendations how we deal with the first 25 feet of that wall. I think that's what you owe Congress, because that's the bureaucracy before it gets to the service. I ask you, and I've asked, no, it's not on the panel. I've asked one major prime for recommendations, and I ask you all to provide Congress recommendations for how we streamline the bureaucracy. We all know the issues. I don't think the issues are the issues here. We need specific recommendations of how we go about in law trying to cut down the first 25 feet of that wall. And I ask you to do that. In my district, obviously I'm still a freshman, but we have held one Defense Industrial Base Roundtable at the Perot Ranch in South Lake, and we will do it every year. We've had most of the primes there and many of the subprimes, and I would ask all of y'all to consider accepting an invitation and asking, and we would be happy to send you an invitation if you did not attend our first one, and some of you did not. We're looking at the August timeframe right now for our next one. But that roundtable is specifically to address the question, how do we make the defense industrial base more agile? And for instance, one of the recommendations I think that you ought to give Congress is, where do we set the bar to move from a small contractor to a large contractor? Because I will tell you, the smalls in my district do not want to become large, because 25 million cannot compete with a Lockheed. And so if we continue to simply meet the American dream and buy up all the small companies, we won't have any small companies, and our number of primes may continue to go down. So I'd like for you to address quickly any FMS, and I've got one more question, but address the FMS recommendations, and I don't need them today, but is that even possible? Can we even get to the 25 feet of wall that we need to simplify?
Congressman, very important question. Happy to provide these, and we can do these today. So AIA, about 18 months ago, did a comprehensive recommendation set for FMS using direct input from our member companies. And so
Did the FMS task force get that?
we provided them the feedback
Really?
directly.
Okay.
So the way that we divided it, because FMS is not just a DoD issue, it's an interagency issue. So we divided that FMS recommendations or feedback to those processes that are controlled by the Department of Defense and those processes that are controlled by the Department of State.
Right.
So we're happy to provide those to you today.
I would love to see them.
But it was probably 40 pages of recommendations that included everything from the sales side to the licensing side to the technology disclosure side, which is also very important for the former
What was the
military.
response to the submission?
We received positive feedback that they appreciated the recommendations.
Very good, thank you. Anyone else?
Congressman, I would just say in response to the subs and the primes question that you asked, I think one of the things that we at Lockheed Martin are most proud of is the supplier base that we have and how many of those companies contribute to our suppliers base. At Lockheed Martin, when we do a program, it's not just a prime win. It's a win for, in many cases, thousands of subprimes who work and support that. In the context of today's hearing, I'd note that we have subs in Australia and UK as well that work very closely with us hand in hand. And we think that as the demand for FMS continues to rise in light of international security events, that we're going to need to rely on those partners and those suppliers more than ever before. So certainly this is a good step to helping the FMS process in terms of bringing the allies closer together.
Well, you've introduced my second question because there is an issue with them bringing their technology into the United States because of our laws and our regulations. How are you going to, does that taint, do they want to bring their products into our system? And what are the challenges that they have to bring their foreign developed products under our laws?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's one that we struggle with on any international sale to the extent that when we deal with U.S. export controls of getting U.S. technology out of the country, there are foreign sovereign export control systems as well, and how they share outside of their territory too. Navigating that myriad of export control regimes can be very timely or time-consuming and costly. And confusing for that matter. So I think it's important as we talk about the AUKUS exemption to recognize that some of the benefit here is addressing in my opinion, misperception that the ITAR control itself is a bad thing. We should expect to control ITAR technologies. They're defense technologies. And if a country is developing their own sovereign technology, working with the United States doesn't immediately apply an ITAR taint, so to speak, to that program. And so I think as we continue down this road of AUKUS exemption, it can help break down those misperceptions.
Do you have examples of countries that have chosen to not bring their products that we could use under our system?
I don't offhand. I'm happy to follow up with you on that if we do have specific examples. I think what I would say is anecdotally, we hear from a number of companies and countries that working with ITAR controls can be overly complex, and the more we can do to break down those barriers would encourage greater cooperation.
And I think examples will help. Okay. Because rather than just talking theory, I think examples are always helpful, particularly if there is a particular product that you need, that you want to use, then I think an example would be helpful. And I would ask for that as well for the committee, because that will help us. If an ally is choosing not to send us something we need, I think we ought to know that. Well, I'm sorry I missed some of your comments, but very helpful to me. I thank you all for your participation, your remarks, and answering our questions. We may have additional questions, and I would ask you to respond to those. We'll submit those to you in writing. Members are reminded that session 2 with the ambassadors will commence at noontime in room 2200. Lunch is provided, and with that, session 1 is concluded. And again, I thank you for your very active participation in our conversation. Thank you very much. We stand adjourned.